fail fast, fail often, and just don't take it to heart. You're just learning along the way, right?
I mean, this whole fail thing is weird. I mean, what do you mean fail? I mean, like
Right.
it's or succeed. I mean, it's very strange to be honest. You do the best you can. I mean, the times when we achieved the things we were looking for, or didn't achieve the things we we're looking for, you're always doing the best you can. You learn how to be more efficient over time for sure. Sometimes you just get plain luckier.
This is the Wealth Holders Podcast. If you want a better grasp on your future, join us on our journey from saver to wealth holder. We talk about investing, economics, and having the right mindset to help you feel confident about your finances. Here's your host, Canadian Kyle.
Hey guys, it's Canadian Kyle here, and welcome to the Wealth Holders Podcast. Today we have Alex on as our first guest, but I just want to spend a few minutes before we actually talk with Alex, and I want to explain what this podcast is all about and what you can expect and take away from it. Now, a little background information. I've been investing in the commodity space for 4 or 5 years now, and it didn't take me long to realize that it's a tough industry to play and invest in. There's companies from all different levels of risk. You can look at an exploration company that is just doing drill holes or haven't even drilled holes yet, to a company that is developing a mine and they're no profit. They're not pulling anything out of the ground to make a profit. They're just all expense. Then there's the mid-tier companies and the large cap companies. These large companies are producing like 1 million or more ounces a year. They're huge. And then there's the royalty company. So our first guest is a royalty company, a CEO, of a royalty company. And we have a few royalty companies lined up. And I think it's important for the younger, newer investor to get into the space because it is a safer bet. And it saves you a lot of headache. You just get exposed to the commodity and not all the risks involved with the mining sector. That being said, we're going to have guests from large mines, medium-sized mines, and exploration and development companies because I'm interested, and I know a lot of people are. That's why they join the space. That's where they can make some excellent returns. So we want to touch on all areas of the market, but it's not going to be about the projects as much as it's going to be about the people. I want to talk to the CEOs and the people behind the companies and look past their credentials and actually figure out who they are as people. I have a genuine curiosity of how these successful men and women became CEOs of these companies, or wherever they are. They might not be CEOs, but for now I have a lot of CEOs lined up. And how did they get there? There's a lot of interest in backgrounds, guys. People could be geologists, or they could be in the finance industry, and now they're a CEO of a royalty or a mining company. And it's not just going to be about looking at these people as an investment. It's going to be taking what they learned from their trials and tribulations, and actually how can you learn as a young investor and entrepreneur. They are successful men and women. So I hope I can facilitate these interviews in a way that are beneficial for the audience as well as the companies. Now, full disclosure, this podcast is not financial advice and should never be taken that way. It's purely for entertainment purposes only. That being said, I might own shares in some of the featured companies. Today, we have Alex Tsukernik from NOVR Royalty, ticker symbol NOVR, and I do currently have shares in that company. Full disclosure. And you'll find out in this interview why I have shares in this company. Alex is a great guy. They have a great team behind him, and they have a unique business model that just makes sense. And I really hope to bring that to light today, and you guys can better understand the concept and what NOVR Royalty is all about. Now, we're going to talk commodities as well in this podcast. I'm making it a point to have Alex on, and our second guest will be Brendan Urick from Electric Royalties on, who are not in the gold and precious metal space, but a lot of the companies will be precious metals based because that is a huge chunk of the companies out there. But you got to invest in what you believe in. Maybe with these podcasts, we can learn more about what gold is and why people are spending so much money on the metal. Alex's approach at Nova Royalty is copper nickel, and he's going to explain why copper and nickel. And Brendan York is all about the battery movement and the change in how we drive vehicles. So you gotta believe in what you invest in, guys. And if you are sick of the system or you want to take your investments into your own hand, don't invest in the overall market. Invest in the companies you believe in. Look into them, do your due diligence, subscribe to their newsletters, look at their websites. And if it's a company that you can back and be proud to say you're a shareholder of, it's a win-win for everyone. You are supporting a movement or a company that you believe in, and I think that's how it should be. I truly do. So with that being said, the Wealth Holders podcast is new, and I would love it if you guys could rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcast, share us. We'll be on YouTube. Like us, subscribe. Get the word out there, because I know there's a lot of people that are my age. I'm only 25, guys. There's a lot of people my age that are interested in this space, but they might not know where to go, and they might not get reliable information at time of recording. That Reddit and GameStop situation is popular, and if you were aware of that, that's not investing, guys. That's gambling. That's not what this podcast is about. It's about learning the people behind the company and the industry to be the jockey behind the horse, and that's what this podcast is about. So without further ado, Alex Tsukernik from NOVR Royalty. Hey guys, it's Canadian Kyle here at the Wealth Holders Podcast. Thank you for joining in on our first episode. We're starting off strong with Alex Tsukernik from NOVR Royalty, ticker symbol NOVR on the Toronto Stock Exchange. At time of recording, the stock just closed at $4.99. Alex, how are you doing today?
Great. How are you?
Good. Well, thanks for joining me on the Wealth Holders Podcast, and thanks for being the first guest.
My pleasure.
Thank you. So the whole point of this podcast is to learn the man behind the company. And I think the best way to start off is by talking about your childhood and wondering where you grew up. Were you a New Yorker at heart? I know you're calling in from New York. Born and raised?
No, it's been an interesting trip. I was actually born in Kiev, in Ukraine, when it was still Soviet Union back then. And then when I was 11 years old, in late 1989, we immigrated from there to the U.S. and actually settled in Boston. And so I grew up. I spent my teenage years in Boston, and then I started university there at Northeastern University, and then I transferred from there to Cornell University to finish up my bachelor's. And then from there, after graduation, I headed to New York City, which was in 2001. And I've been here pretty much ever since.
Oh, so you moved at a relatively old age, 11 years old. Like, you remember a lot about the Ukraine or the Soviet Union at the time, right? And that must have been tough for you to move at. Did you speak English well?
No, I knew 2 words, which served me very well: I and one.
I am one. Why did one serve you well?
Well, the thing is, what you do is you say "I want" and then you point to something. So that's how you get by in the beginning. So it worked pretty well.
Okay. So immigrant, I didn't know that. So you have that immigrant mentality, obviously, because you're running a business that's pretty damn successful, to say the least. So I want to know more about what you were doing when you were my age. I'm 25 right now, and what was your 20s like?
Actually, I think back to my 20s. The first couple of years of my career were probably the hardest I ever had. Because you're not sure exactly what you want to do. You're doing something you think you're supposed to do, and I think it took me a good 3 years. I think very good luck to land at a place where I really fit. The first couple places I worked, were large firms, and I think in many ways it feels like the job you're supposed to have. It's probably, I think in my case, probably wasn't necessarily the best place for me to be. But I think you just go through the process, and I think you feel better progressively through your 20s, as you're doing the things that make more sense to you.
Yeah, and I'm slowly getting that feeling starting this podcast. I'm like, oh, this feels like a better direction than what I'm currently on. So I'm excited, and it's nice to hear that everyone kind of goes through that. So I saw you went to school at the Columbia School of Business, and I saw this honors, Beta Gamma Sigma honors. That sounds pretty prestigious. What's that all about?
Well, I think they give that to, I think, something like top 20% of the graduating class. So I earned that. I mean, it was a great experience at the school. I mean, I was working full time at the time that I went. I don't think I could have gone to school full time at that point. I liked my job too much, and I was working with a great group of people. But it was phenomenal. I mean, you go to school Fridays and Saturdays twice a month. That's how the executive MBA program is structured. You meet other people who are sort of have interesting jobs and also want to go to school to learn and do things. So, I mean, look, only good things to remember from Columbia for sure.
Oh, nice, nice. A few good weekends, I'm sure. Or I guess you're studying all weekend. When do you even party?
No, you don't. You don't have that much time to party. I think. I mean, I think between my job and school, that was pretty much all I had time for. But to be honest with you, I didn't really want time for anything else. I was quite happy doing those two things.
No, for sure. Was there entrepreneurship in your family, or was your family in the commodity or finance space? Like, what drew you to this space?
Now, I mean, look, I mean, we're an immigrant family. My parents are engineers, and I know, like, we grew up in the Soviet Union. We didn't have entrepreneurs. I mean, it was everything was government controlled. Um, and so I think I had an interest in business. Uh, I think from an early age. Not sure exactly why. I think it's just one of those things that interested me. And I went to work initially in finance on Wall Street, and which is entrepreneurial to a degree, but it isn't as well. And then I think at some point I realized I wanted to try things more on my own. So I left to work for myself in early 2011. Um, and so I was doing that for over 7 years before we put Nova together, sort of as a formal company. And I think you learn a lot of things when you're on your own.
Now, that must be a tough business to start. So you have this entrepreneurial drive, but in the finance sector, you tell people this is a good investment, and then one day they look and it's red, or it's down their investment, and they're like, "Oh, come on! What you said this was a sure thing, or this is a good bet." Like, you must have had to have grown some tough skin at a young age, and maybe you could explain what the journey was like for running and starting your first business, because Nova wasn't your first one, correct?
No, no. I mean, the thing is, I kind of my last, I guess, formal job, before all this was I ran mining investment banking at a bank in New York called Rahman and Renshaw, and I was very fortunate there. I mean, I had a great relationship with the guys that owned the firm, and they treated me really well. So only good things to say about them. I think you just come to a point where you feel like you need to go and do things on your own and figure things out as you go. Um, I don't think I appreciated how much of a transition that would be. You come out and you're full of confidence and bluster and all those things. Then I think you find out exactly how much you don't know. Sort of about the things you actually do need to know about if you're going to be successful. So I think if I were to summarize it as you start trying things without really understanding what you're doing, to be perfectly frank. But hopefully, as you're sort of making your errors, there's realizations that come, and so that you get better at it as you go. At least you realize the things that you need to learn how to do and see. And I think what you really begin to focus on at a certain point is consistency, just everyday consistency. So you stay really focused on what you're trying to do. You never get much of a gain on a daily basis. If you can get an inch, that's pretty good. But as long as you just keep adding the inches, I think it adds up to a pretty to a pretty good sum. And I think so. good or bad, you just focus on the best inches you can make at that moment in time, and you try not to project too much in the future, because none of us really get that. So I think you just learn how to focus, not to invest too much emotions into any one thing happening, because you never really know anything, and just do the best you can. And then eventually, as you relax a bit into it, then things begin to happen.
Yeah. So
Playing luckier. But I mean, it's not as if anything ever really changes. You're just doing the best you can, and as you learn, then hopefully you become more consistent and better at what you're doing.
no, I like that. I like that a lot. So what's the typical day like for you now? What's it like running a royalty company? What's the day in and day out?
I mean, I think the way I think about it is, it's not as if you're sitting there with detailed schedule of every 5 minutes. There's things that are truly important to do on a specific day, so you kind of fill those in. But I think much more importantly than that is that you always try to keep the central idea of what you're doing ahead of you, in front of you, because that's what drives everything. Sort of it's not how many things you do in a day; it's with how much focus are you doing the things that you're doing. So you don't need to do 20 things in a day. You probably got to do one thing well, really well, and that may take you enough energy where you can't do anything else. But that one thing you gotta get done just as well as you possibly can, because it's always that maximal exertion on a crucial task that makes a difference. It's not about doing 20 things. So it's kind of like working out, I think, in many ways. If you want to make real progress in your physical training, it's not about doing 100 reps. It's about doing 5 really good reps. So it's I think the same thing here. So so I think as long as you can stay focused on your central idea, and overall kind of your activities make sense to you, I think you've done pretty well, and just move on to the next day.
Yeah, a lot of people take pride in multitasking, but really that's not where the best results come. It's when you're just hunker down on the main project at hand, and don't be trying to consume news when you have to do this and when you have to prepare for your next thing. And
I think multitasking is a very dangerous habit, personally.
yeah.
I mean, you're not going to be good at everything. That's not possible. But you can be good at certain things. So you might as well be good at those things, and then figure out how you do the rest of them, or you get somebody else to do them. So
Yeah.
there's only 24 hours in a day here.
Delegate, 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 delegate.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you can, if you're doing too many things, it means you're diluting what you're doing.
hmm So that's great. I really like that. So I want to talk about Nova Royalty now, and how it
Sure.
came to be and the concept of it, because I just heard on an interview you just did with Adrian Day and Brett
Mhm.
Heath, and in the interview you called Nova Royalty an energy company, and I thought that was a unique way to phrase it, and I agree with you 100%. It totally makes sense. It's an energy company, but it didn't make sense until you said it. So where did you come up with this idea, and how did you see this when no one else saw this? Because now Nova Royalty has the first mover advantage, and you guys already made some amazing deals happen.
We always saw it that way. The reason we started the company is because we saw a new energy supply chain forming. So you have just fundamental change in sensibilities. I mean, Kyle, you're 25 years old. Your generation and any people somewhat older, they see the environmental crisis, climate change, emissions, clean air, as an existential threat. I mean, for instance, I'm 42. People from my generation, I think, are much more divided, or at least I would say definitely milder perspective on this issue. And so the way I saw it was, okay, look, the world's making a decision to change basically how we live and power the planet. So your energy supply chain is going to change from oil and gas to wind, solar, whatever that is, and that's really copper, nickel as the main ingredients. So the way we saw it was, you investing in the new energy supply chain. So it was a really simple picture in their mind.
Yeah, I'm in Thunder Bay, Ontario here, and this January was like unheard of. I think the average was -7 for the month. So you're right. My generation does care because we're going to be living on this planet for a while. And the other thing too is that like, what's your thoughts on peak oil? Have we passed peak oil? Are we there? When is it still a few years out? What's your
I
thoughts
never
on?
bought into I never bought into that thing. I thought it was complete nonsense. What do you mean peak oil? All you gotta do is just change the commodity price, and you'll have all the oil you'll ever need. So,
Right, right.
I mean, it's not as if there's not enough oil in the ground. It's just there wasn't enough oil extractable at a specific price. Every commodity is like that. We don't have a shortage of quote unquote mineable material. We have a shortage of mineable material at a specific price. And look, it takes longer. It could take a while to get the projects into production, and capital and time and all this stuff for sure. But the stuff is in the ground. There's no shortage of materials.
Yeah, and that's an argument with copper too, isn't it? It's like there's plenty of copper around. What are you talking about? But it's really,
Well,
go ahead.
like, get it out first, then tell me how much of it actually exists. The thing is, like, yes, can you get out all the copper you'll ever need at $20 a pound? Probably a lot of it, yes. But that I'm not sure if that helps us live today. So
Right. No, for sure. So how do you approach these deals? I'm wondering because you got like the biggest deposits in like some of the biggest deposits in the world for copper and nickel, and I was wondering, did you just when you started NOVR Royalty, did you get a list of all the key assets and you said, okay, I want to hit this one, this one, this one, and you just called them up and you did an elevator pitch? Or is it about connections? Or how do you make these deals happen?
actually, it was a little bit of everything you just mentioned. When we started the company, both Brett and I had very good networks in the sector, and so we started with the full team around the world. Sort of U.S., Canada, Chile, Peru, Australia, the whole bit. And so we mapped out the whole universe of assets as well. So literally every piece of copper and nickel in the ground, we put into our database, and we prioritized it based on strength of geological camp, operators, and all this. So it's a lot of work that went into this. And then once we narrowed it down, then I think using our relationships on the ground, we actually approached the owners of the royalties on the assets we wanted. And so that's what allowed us to kind of actually execute. So because there's a lot of on the ground knowledge, there's a lot of on the ground knowledge and relationships, familiarity you need to execute well. And so, for instance, the Tsukernik in Argentina, we had 4 different attorneys working in that deal. So, we had our Canadian counsel, we had our Argentinian counsel, we had our advisor in Chile, who was also a lawyer. Plus, we had a separate lawyer in Canada who was both Chilean and Canadian. So you need a lot of relationships and expertise and people who really understand what they're doing to get these things done well. And we've been fortunate. We had a great team associated with the company, and that's what allows us to do what we do. You certainly can't do it from New York by yourself.
And speaking of the great team, for NOVR, I wonder if you have a chip on your shoulder, because when I look at YouTube comments or chat forums about NOVR Royalty, a lot of my generation are like, oh, I'm buying this. This is the next MTA, or E.B. Tucker founded this. I'm all in. It's the next MTA. Do you have a little bit of a chip on the shoulder? Do you think you have something to prove because of the MTA, E.B. Tucker, Brett Heath story, or is that just fuel for the fire?
No, there's no fuel. There's no fire. These are my teammates, and so, we've got, sort of, we're lucky that, kind of we see the same thing and we're trying to achieve the same thing. So, the hardest thing, I think, for any company is to have a cohesive group that wants to accomplish the same goal. And we're fortunate enough to have it. So no, I think it's great.
Yeah, it's a solid team, that's for sure. So for the younger audience, they saw this big run up in the NOVR Royalty stock price in a matter of 3 months or whatever it was. I was lucky enough that I went in early around $1.75, and I had to take profits around $3.75 because I'm like, this is impressive. And now I'm like, well, why the hell did I do that? But my question is that people might think, oh, did I miss the boat? I should have bought in at $1.75. And I hear a lot of people my age say, oh, I should have bought in at that price. Or the other thing is that I bought in at the $6 and now it's back down to $5. Geez, I bought in too high. Well, can you help explain to the new investors out there that maybe this isn't too early, or in the long run, how do you view this logic?
I mean, listen, it's I think what I try to do is run the company, not so much give stock advice. I think that'll be well outside kind of my purview. What I can say is, look, we didn't start this company for a 6-month run or a 12-month run or a 3-year run. We started it because we thought this could be a truly great institution that has a clear place as a leader in what I think are the most strategic commodities in the world. So we're going to keep doing that. Whether people want to stick around for 3 months or whether they stick around for 20 years, I mean, that's a very individual thing. I can't comment.
I like to use this analogy that the market is like dating. You can date someone for a month or you can date them for a few years, but you're more like a family man with a home, and you have to make sure the house is in order, right? And
exactly. I mean, listen, you don't get to choose the time horizons of your investor base. I don't think that's I don't think that's on the menu, but I think you do get to choose the investment horizon of the company, and in terms of how it approaches its business. So I think we are a very good thing for someone who sees the big picture of what's happening in the world and what we're trying to do. I think this is a great way to invest in that because you're getting optionality and exposure to truly the most blue chip assets out there, operated by the best companies. If somebody wants to trade, God bless you. I just don't have any advice for you.
So this is the first podcast, and I do want to talk about the royalty model and the optionality behind it for those newer investors, and maybe explain how, like, you have been very clear from the start that you're a copper nickel play, so you're very specialized, but at the same time you offer diversification for the investors. So maybe you could explain diversification and optionality for someone that might just be getting into the commodity space or looking into what a royalty company is.
Look, diversification comes through the projects. So we're focused on the commodities. We are, for reasons I think we've gone over many times, these are the two most important commodities when it comes to electrification. They're also supply constrained, meaning you can't just bring a project into production easily. So there's real lags and complexities to getting new production online. But you can diversify yourself in terms of number of projects, so you're not dependent on just one or two projects. So I think that's how we think about the business. I mean, what I would love to see for the company going forward is that you can capture a significant number of the truly material projects in the sectors within NOVR, which will then, I think, allow the investors to invest in something which is truly unique in terms of exposure, because you have exposure to these strong projects without any costs, and you get the diversification, and it's just in the public company. And so eventually, once we're in position, we'll pay a dividend as well. It's not tomorrow, but I think once we can get to a sustainable place, for sure. So that's how we think about our business. If you kind of really the incremental copper nickel investment dollar, we would want to capture that, I think, for NOVR.
For sure. For a royalty company, I do like what you just said about the margin of safety there. But what do you think is the key metric for a royalty company to look for, or the key factors? Because it is a small space, but there are a lot of them, and you at NOVR Royalty actually were able to branch out and be the first of its kind with the copper and nickel. But that being said, if people were to look into other royalty companies, what are the main things to look at? are some key metrics that the young investors could look for in what makes a good royalty company?
Let's go back to the beginning. The objective of the royalty company is to capture the cash flows and the optionality inherent in a mining project at the most competitive price possible, and give the investors the most investable portfolio that they can. If you look at the companies that perform the best, and I think when you look at the history of the space, I think you've got to look at really two, and that's Franco-Nevada and Wheaton Precious. There's a lot of commonalities here. They buy the longest life, highest quality assets in the world. And so I don't think it's that complicated, actually. When you look at the asset selection, and it really starts with that. So you have long life, you have high quality, you have top-notch operators. If you have those things, then the details, I mean, are relevant, but they're not going to be that different. That's how we thought about our business too. If you look at what we bought, I do think you see a theme. And so just focus on that. I mean, the financial metrics in our business are very misleading because there's a lot of desktop projects and there's very few real ones. And so I think the companies that have done the best are the ones who know how to put their chips on the real projects. And they know when to come in, they understand when they need to be aggressive to make sure they can lock them in. But I think they have that focus from the very start. So I'd say that's the most important thing, is just really having a focus on the quality stuff. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of companies now, and I mean, listen, I hope everyone does well, but I do think that when you look at the top two guys, then I think the lessons become very clear.
Mm-hmm. And another thing is that a lot of these companies buy during the bear markets, and now with gold heating up and all these companies coming to play, it's kind of refreshing looking at Nova, because copper had a nice run a bit, but really in a long-term cycle, it's cheap, the copper and nickel price, correct?
I think so. Mm-hmm. I mean, kind of what we started in 2018. Back then, people thought copper and nickel royalty company, why would you do that?
Yeah.
So, you guys need gold or something like that. I mean, but predicting commodity prices is a funny business. It's very tough to do. But I think what you can do is to see if a commodity has a clear place in the supply chain and whether its importance can increase. And if you can figure that out, I think the prices will take care of themselves. Because supply and demand will do what they do. So we look for clear demand. We look for supply constraints in terms of challenge of bringing projects into production. I mean, bringing a copper mine and nickel mine into production is hard with a capital H. I mean, sort of these management teams have to do yeoman's work to get it done. And it's easy to be a royalty company in comparison. So I think if you can figure that out, and we spent a lot of time on both of those commodities before we kind of made a definitive decision to focus the mix on that, I think you're going to be okay. And I think, I do think that where we've bought in the cycle, I think there's a huge way to go, because the world is still very early in its electrification sort of phase. This isn't a 2-year or 5-year thing. This is going to be multi-decade type of situation. So we're very happy to have done this now. Absolutely.
It's so refreshing hearing how consistent you are, like about the trend, about how you're going to execute on this trend. You don't stray from it at all. You're just very straight to the point, and I appreciate that. That's pretty reassuring. So one thing, this isn't not really about Nova Royalty, but as a young investor out there, I'm wondering, where do you go for reliable sources of information? Is there any public sources you recommend, or because you were in the finance business and industry and for a long time, so instead of people nowadays on GameStop and looking at Reddit,
Yeah, that's a whole new element in the market,
Mhm.
to say the least. Look, I know for myself, um, it's actually, you ask an interesting question. The most important thing I think you learn in time is to how to look at things through your own prism in a way that inherently makes sense to you. And I think that probably comes from two things. One, I think, as you go through and you meet people, you learn to identify people with whom you're comfortable and whom you want to work with, and I think whom you learn to trust. Number one. And I think that's a legwork issue. You have to kiss a lot of frogs, kind of as part of the education. And I think you have, I mean, I would encourage anyone to feel comfortable making mistakes and understand that's just part of the process. You know, you can't go in the water and walk out dry. It doesn't work that way. And you got to go in the water here. That's number one. Number two, I would encourage everyone to just read as much as possible, because everything we're living through right now, this isn't the first time it's happening. This is the umpteenth time it's happening. Everything, human nature doesn't change, cycles don't change. I mean, the details change, but I think you'll over time learn how to spot that. So I do think you can get much more comfortable with what you're saying out there, just through practice and working.
Mhm. Yeah, the lesson of history is that no one learns the lessons of history.
Well, yeah, because they become outdated apparently, and so you realize that
Yeah.
they're actually quite modern.
Oh, 100%. How do you see COVID affecting this at all? Like, with it's already been a year in, obviously things have this permanent change in this world, but do you see that at all with your business with Nova Royalty?
Look, COVID, I mean, I think it's affected the whole world. Um, I think we've been extraordinarily fortunate because, we work remotely. We work remotely all the way through. Because when you have a team that's everywhere, then the only way you really can work is through the usual communication tools. No, I think it's been much tougher for people who obviously have to rely on a physical workplace, and it's been just brutal. And I think one thing that COVID has probably done, it's probably even more focused everyone on public health and the importance of things. I do think the electrification movement is as much about public health as anything else. It's really, I think the urgency behind it is driven by that. So I think that a lot of things that people were thinking would happen may even be accelerated as a result.
You
And
view that
also, I
with
think,
with electrification too, not just about working remotely and doing things online. You view that with electrification as well?
sorry, I misunderstood your question.
You saying that it
Oh,
accelerated some trends that are already going
yes.
to happen, such as working remotely and getting comfortable with online shopping and stuff, but you also see that with electrification?
Oh, for sure. Because I think electrification was always at its core a public health issue. And I think now with governments and societies really focused on public health, I think is the primary issue a lot of the time. I think it's probably put the electrification issue even more in the forefront, no question.
Yeah, well, that's true with the blue wave. Biden, first thing he said is we're going right back to the Paris Agreement, right? So
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's I think what's happened, I think during 2020 is people I think people feel much more vulnerable overall. I think COVID brought that home to everyone. And I think that societies and governments are now reacting to that in multiple ways. And I think increased environmental sensitivity and government focus on public health, electrification, clean energy, medical care. I think that's all really part of one focus.
I agree. That makes sense. So we're gonna wrap things up here with a recurrent segment on the podcast called The Vault, and you'll be the first one making a deposit into the vault.
Okay.
So in the vault, it's just 3 questions that you could help teach my generation from your trials and tribulations and what you learned throughout your life. So the first question is what's something that your parents taught you at a young age that's has stuck with you till this day?
I mean, look, I've been really lucky with parents. I mean, they're still teaching me stuff, and I'm 42. So I think you appreciate a lot of things, but I think that they're both very grounded people, and they just go about what they do every day, and I think that's the most important. And so, kind of immigration is a funky experience, to be honest, because you go into a new place, you don't speak the language, the culture is foreign, a lot of stuff is new and really scary, to be honest. And I think, but I never felt looking at them that something would go wrong. I think you feel confidence because you see confidence, and it's not as if they were superhuman. They made all the usual mistakes that everybody else does, but they stayed at it. And I think that's probably the best thing you can learn.
That's good. Next question is, can you name 1 or 2 wealth holders or high net worth individuals that have influenced your life in a positive way? Who were they, and what did you learn from them?
I think that people. I mean, I think wealth, I think, is one of those things where if you define it in purely financial terms, I think that's probably a mistake. Because I mean, imagine most people, that's not the end point. I think it's a great tool, for sure. I mean, I think everybody would like that financial wealth. Um, I, th- I think the people that I learned the most from are the ones who really understood why they were doing what they were doing. And I think that came across in all of their actions. Um, so, I mean, I've met some truly outstanding people, and I had the chance to work with some truly outstanding people, kind of in the course of things. And I think the best thing you can do is just take from each person the things that make sense to you without asking them to be more than what they can be. Because everybody has strengths, everybody has weaknesses, and so I think the more that you kind of get in touch with what makes sense to you, then you can cherry pick from each person what fits the puzzle for yourself without deifying them or asking them to be more than a man or a woman, because I think there's a big temptation.
I'm so happy that our first guest is mentioned something that I wanted to drive home on this podcast, is that wealth does not mean money. And I think you're so right about that. It's a means to an end, but what is that end? And you have to find that on your own. And money ain't going to solve any problem. Well, it will solve problems, but not all your problems.
I think if you're not careful, it can create a lot of problems that you'll have trouble solving, because I don't think you can replace essential things that you have to kind of work on yourself. And I think people with financial wealth, sometimes do fall into that trap of thinking that it in and of itself can solve problems or make them something, kind of give them a shortcut, but that's generally not how things are. So I think everybody learns that, the hard way sometimes.
No, for sure. So that's great advice for people my age. But is there any other advice you could share for the 25-year-olds and the young people listening out there?
Listen, it's advice is one of those things. I mean, I can only tell you what I've learned,
Mm-hmm.
at least what I think I've learned. Um, I think I think the most important thing is just to kind of not expect too much from yourself, because you want to set a direction. Obviously, I think you want to achieve certain things. I think that's probably a human condition as there is. But I think a lot of the time people don't succeed at it because they beat themselves up for not being perfect, or for not doing the things that they think they should be doing and the like. And I think no matter the every person that you see, that seems to have something. There's a lot of trial and error in that process, and I think just understanding that that's going to be a part of it, and kind of being as easy in yourself as you can in that, I think will probably make it much more likely for you to accomplish the things you want to accomplish.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Alex. I'll leave it for you now to close off and talk about anything about Nova Royalty, any exciting news that you're allowed to share, or anything that you want to leave with our listeners, and how they can get in touch with Nova and yourself.
Well, look, I mean, I think we're building a company that we think can be a great way to participate in this energy transition. And we're not trying to be all things to all people. We're focusing on this specific sector. We've built it to be a great company. We've really started with what we think are premier deposits, which I think create a great foundation for us, both for the existing investors and for other royalty owners who want to invest into Nova to participate in what we're doing. So I think we have an opportunity to be a true participant in what is happening. And we don't really want to do anything else. I think one thing that is super pleasing for me to be a part of this, and with the other people here, is that everybody really wants to be here. Everybody knows why we're doing this. Everybody sees the opportunity, and I think it's a great team to be a part of. So it's assets, it's a team, it's focus. I think it's pretty transparent what we've done. We're always very happy to answer questions from potential investors. If people want to get in touch with us on the website, there's contact info, and they can send questions to the info at Nova, and we'll respond quite quickly. So, we welcome investors as a part of the journey. We'd love to have people who see what we see. We're not in a position to provide short-term trading stock tips, but we'll certainly do the best we can to tell people why we do what we do.
Mm-hmm. One thing I want to share with the listeners is that I'm new to investing. I've been investing for about 4 or 5 years or so, but when I invest, I subscribe to the newsletters. And if you don't know that, subscribe to the investments newsletters that you're invested in, so you're up to date. But Nova Royalty was the first company that reached out to me and said, do you have any questions? Do you want to schedule a call and talk about this investment or this opportunity? And I think that's great what you guys did there.
Yeah, I think it's we view our investors as as a really part of the journey and the company and the like, and so we try to help them and be as transparent as possible about what we're doing. So if anybody has questions, we're always happy to answer them. And we want to have people invested here for the next 20 years. That would be the goal. So the more people want to do that, I think the happier we would be, for sure.
Well, I think you're very transparent with this podcast here. So I'd like to thank you again for being the first guest, and thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Kyle. Have a great one.
Yeah, you too.
Disclaimer. The Wealth Holders podcast is for entertainment purposes only, not financial advice. We might hold investments in some featured companies. Always do proper due diligence and speak to a professional before investing. We take no responsibility in the performance of your investments. Past success does not indicate future performance.